Okay. The entire
is now up, so now we're streaming with audio.
Great. Well, just waiting to start. A few more minutes. It's a Sunday. Yeah. It's a Sunday after a historic football win by Finland, so everything is just a bit slower than usual.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Cool. All right. Sure. Should we close the door? Does it change anything?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean,
Great.
it'll make the presentation clearer for people who are in the room, but if there aren't many people in the room, then it's more important that the stream is going out nice.
Does the audio come through?
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't need it at the moment.
Hi. Welcome. Jump in. Just grab a seat. Hi, Auntie.
Please sit on this side of the...
5 minutes past, you can pull us if you like.
Yeah? Yeah, it's 5 minutes past.
Yeah, I think if someone wants to come in, they can knock the door.
Yep. I'll tell Vishnu to just come on in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, guys, let's go for this. Nice. Thanks for coming on this like kind of windy, rainy summer day, and I have about an hour, I think, including Q&A. I have a lot of slides for you, and this is a presentation about a project that's been going on for almost 3 years now. So I have more of like a journey to take you on, and I think it's really interesting when working with a new medium like virtual reality, which is just now getting adoption into the mainstream, or really it's pre-adoption in terms of mainstream markets. It's interesting to see the process that serious commercial projects actually take, which require funding and which have actual market impact. And this is the story of Dementia XR, what we call our project, where XR stands for extended reality. Extended reality, or XR, is an umbrella term that encompasses virtual reality, augmented reality, and all of these new technologies which kind of mess with reality. I'm sure there are more scholarly definitions for that, but that should do for the moment. And I'll try to take you through this. Thanks, Pixelache, for having me here, and thanks for showing up. And you guys who are watching, lean back, and I hope you enjoy this. So the story starts actually with this gentleman who's my grandfather, and this photo was taken like 15 years ago. I took this picture in India in our home, and he studied law. Hi Vishnu, welcome. He studied law, and he was quite a sharp and astute guy. I learned a lot of stuff from him as a kid growing up, I certainly get a lot of my speaking and language skills and probably logical thinking skills from him. I was definitely homeschooled by him as well as my mother. And I think he'd be really proud to see his photograph here today in the Central Library. But inspiring as he was, soon after the death of his spouse, he started to have cognitive decline, which was really rapid, and it was almost unbelievable. And over a period of a decade, he continued on this decline until he passed away to natural causes, but he had severe dementia, what's called dementia, by the time he was no more. And he was well taken care of to the end. And in India, actually, we have a very good, if you're of a certain economic class, you can afford to have pretty good elder care. So he was lucky in that sense, but it didn't make anything easier for him or for us. And the impact of this whole thing, it comes on you so fast as a family that it just makes you think about this thing, the mind and the brain and its breakdown, and how that can happen even to someone who has been extremely sharp and intelligent and perceptive. So me and my sister, we both studied psychology. I studied psychology and then I studied design, and she went on to study psychology all the way as a master's, and now she practices as a therapist. So she actually got into aging related therapy, and I think it was partly triggered by what happened to my grandfather, but it was almost simultaneous. She was very interested in both the mind in its developmental stages very early in life, and the mind in decline at the very end. And senescence studies, as it's called, is a fascinating subject. And she started to inquire into that, and the two of us started to think more about this thing called dementia. And now I'm just going to bomb you with a few statistics and numbers, probably not the most typical Pixelache presentation, but you really need to look at the numbers to appreciate the impact of this thing. Not only are we a rapidly aging species, we also, dementia is said to be, in some ways, dementia is said to be a sort of, it's called a consequence or a side effect of living. And the problem is we're living much longer, but our brains haven't yet caught up with the ability to remain functional and remain really strong into our old age. And so what you see is essentially increasing cases of dementia across all, especially developed countries where people are living longer. And the numbers are just crazy, like the cost, the percentages, the number of people affected. And the more research you do, the more you find that we basically have a slow epidemic of sorts. Numbers in terms of percentages. So the chances that someone you know very closely, or you care about, or you yourself developing dementia in the last decade of your life, the chances are now almost certain. If you live long enough, you will face cognitive breakdown, or you will need to care, or you will know somebody who's close to you who will face this. Just some more numbers there. There's fortunately more and more research about this condition. But this is an interesting So we said, we didn't think of the medium first, although we had a sort of inclination that we should probably be going with, VR or XR technologies for reasons I will come to next. But we really thought, what if we could create an intervention or a product or a service that could kind of take that steep stress and learning curve, make it flatter, make it just more easy to land into the situation, have the carer be more prepared, and then kind of, give them more preparation in terms of the next steps. So that was where we focused our solution in terms of the journey. And our goal is really, and it remains the same, but the goal is really to reduce the carer preparation time down from months and years to days and weeks, which is it's a pretty radical change if you think about it, because if the carer, has someone who develops dementia, then it takes 2-3 years to figure out what exactly is going on, and what life adjustments they should make, what life is going to be like on a day-to-day basis, how to treat this elder, and so on. So we said, how can we reduce that preparation time and have them be more prepared? That was kind of the goal of our solution from the very beginning. And then we got into the medium and we said, okay, hey, this is the thing we want to go for. This is the problem we want to solve. So it's almost like when we looked at apps and we looked at websites and we looked at products and services, it was like anything very 2D. There's videos, there is instructional stuff, there are apps and things like that. But I thought, or what we thought was kind of like the carer viewpoint was just really missing, like a subjective viewpoint. And that's one of the things that VR or AR really kind of gives you a subjective, immersive viewpoint. And dementia is kind of a progressive disease. It starts off with certain, early stage issues and then escalates into these other stages, middle and later stages. And it's complex. It's not something that you can read a Wikipedia page about. You can get an idea if you read a Wikipedia page about it, but you can't actually, you can't get an experiential idea. And the big problem we found when we talked to carers like my mom was that essentially she didn't know what was happening in the black box of my grandfather's head, right? She had to guess all the time. If he showed up at 3 in the morning and started talking about some relatives who are going to arrive in the morning, or if he started talking about the thieves have broken into the house again, she's like, what on earth are you talking about? It's 3 a.m., go back to bed. She didn't have any recipe to deal with that. She didn't have any script, much less really could she anticipate what could happen. So we said, why don't we, think about that, think about the cognitive science, the emotional science, the behavioral science, and all of this stuff, try to bundle it all together and say, why don't we go in for a simulation? So we thought about simulation as the answer. We said, let's go into the subjective view and see what we can do. So far, kind of abstract, and then we started to get a little bit more concrete, because when we compared the different media, like I said, on the far right is VR. Immersion into any experience usually builds, it just evokes empathy. It's like you're watching a film. You might not even like the character so much, but you somehow emote when something happens to them. Multi-dimensional, progressive learning, customized content, all of this stuff is possible in a way that's not possible with apps and books and so on. And then we kind of narrowed in on the key scenarios that we wanted to simulate. So it turns out that there's a lot of good research on dementia, theoretical research. There is a lot of agreement in terms of what the main types of dementia are, what the symptoms are, what they look like. And so you have these issues with thinking, with memory, with judgment, language, but then the deeper underlying issues are personality changes. You have issues of someone who's really optimistic and been a go-getter, they start to become more pessimistic or they have less initiative. And then there can be mood and behavioral changes. So it's pretty complex, but this is documented. This is not really what we came up with. This is what we picked up from the literature and said, okay, there's clearly these key areas that we could kind of develop as simulations, and we could kind of help the carer kind of get familiar with. All right, so then we began, doing some designerly stuff. Essentially, kind of, how do you take all the crazy things that could possibly happen and break them down into a few, chunks of scripts or stories or ideas which could show these states. And so I don't know if you get what I'm going for yet, but basically we're talking about simulating a subjective experience using VR, which nobody has access to. So if you drink alcohol and you're drunk, I could also drink alcohol, and I could kind of get an idea of what it means to be intoxicated. I won't exactly know what it felt like for you, but I'll get some idea. But if you have dementia, there's no way I can, simulate, like, there's no way I can create cognitive breakdown in my head to figure out what's going on. So there's a certain artistic license you have to take as a creator, and you have to say, well, from what we know about how people with dementia behave, maybe they're having a memory loss issue, or they clearly have a problem with forgetting. And so this is where things got interestingly, like, a project that's a very kind of a therapeutic solution starts to have artistic dimensions, really. And you need to start being creative. You're not just trying to reproduce a certain reality. You're trying to fake it, basically, or you're trying to come up with creative ways to show that reality. So yeah, this is just a mind map of a small piece of a larger mind map where we try to figure out what those key scenarios should be. And in the end, we came up with, like, basically, these three areas. We said we need to simulate disorientation, very broad word, disorientation, like so many kinds of disorientation possible. Hallucination is another one, and memory loss. And clearly these three have overlaps. But we said if we start here first and we show at least a few convincing scenarios of what this feels like, then carers could get a more empathetic understanding of this condition. And that's what we were going for. So all of these slides are actually from across many presentations and pitch decks, and we presented to foundations, we presented to hackathons, we presented to a few angels, and obviously, as I'll show you in the end, we picked up a team as we've gone along. So we've been presenting this material over and over again. So it's kind of like just a montage of all of that stuff over time, over the last 2-3 years. All right, lots of facts and abstract stuff. I'll show you a few like designerly things as well. I unfortunately don't have anything that looks like a VR experience, but really we've been sketching and we've been doing all sorts of fun stuff on the creative side, trying to figure out like what these scenarios could look like. Do I have like 5 minutes till Q&A, Steve? Or 10?
We thought 20 is fine.
Yes.
Yeah, it's another 35 minutes.
But Q&A is 20?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Great.
we've got 15 and then Q&A.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries. No worries. Yeah. Perfect. So this is one of those early scenarios that we. So I'll talk a little bit about like the thought process of the challenges really of thinking about VR. We have to realize that the best immersive experiences we really have today are games, really. 3D immersive experiences are mostly games. And games are, you have these tiny games on your phone and stuff. That's not the games I'm talking about. I'm talking about console type games where you can actually get into a world and do stuff and you're free to run around. Like you can just go anywhere in the auditorium and sit on any seat. That's like an insane amount of work to actually model. And it takes a very large crew, it takes a massive budget, a film type production. It's crazy big. So for a novice team that's thinking to try to simulate like, dementia experiences or whatever, we started obviously very wide, and we said, let's have this scenario, for example, where an old person walks down a street. So basically you put on the headset and you are the old person. You live, or you do like really simple things, but then you experience hallucinations, you experience disorientation, you experience memory loss. And this was a scenario where you walk down a familiar street known to you, and then you just go to an ATM to draw money, and the ATM goes dark because it's kind of like sunset, and there is a certain disorientation that happens because low light or changes in light can create hallucinations or disorientation in some people with dementia. So lighting affects them quite strongly. So and there are about at least 10 kind of documented types of dementia, of which Alzheimer's is probably one of the most known, but there are several others. They share characteristics and they have also very unique signatures. So it's quite a lot to wrap up, and it's kind of like a leap of confidence to say we can come up with a few scenarios that shows you dementia. It's going to be a very small peek into the reality of it, but it's better than nothing. Anyway, so if you come up with a scenario like that, it's super interesting. We ran into the really interesting challenges of things like memory. So how do you show someone, if you've just put on the headset and you've never ever, you don't know this experience from before, how do I tell you that this street is familiar to you? How do we simulate familiarity? That's so hard a problem in itself. So we, for a lot of reasons, a lot of our scenarios just broke down because in order to do them, we'd either need a crazy big budget or we'd need some genius storytelling, or both. And in this case, for example, the familiarity thing was a real problem. We thought, could we have someone, this is just a mock-up of, so essentially when we were brainstorming, we were doing mock-ups just to kind of talk through how it works. But it was like, could it be like a neighbor just saying, hello there, Mr. or whatever. And so you're like, it tells you that they know you, so you're on a familiar street. Like, how do you mimic that? So anyways, this was a scenario we kind of had to, we had to move away from it. But we did do some 3D modeling, and it's this chaotic process of coming up with a scenario, believing in it, doing a bit of the work, and then realizing that actually it doesn't fully hold together because it has these problems like how do you, reinforce memory, or how do you reinforce familiarity? And so it's like, no, maybe that's not the best scenario to go for. Because the problem with a project like this is there are some examples online. It's been done with, say, 360 video, and there are some VR examples. But obviously none of those will just exactly work for your vision of the thing. So the problem is there is no reference that any investor or any hospital or any city organization has. And if you go and tell them, we're going to simulate dementia for you, and that'll help the carers better care for elders, they're like, okay, sounds good, show me. And they're like, oh crap, yeah, I have to show you something, at least a 2-minute, like a little mini version of it. So then you have to get building, and when you get building, then you run into all these little problems. So I really enjoy this case because it's been 2 or 3 years of absolutely, like, it's the slowest moving project I've ever worked on, but it's the most satisfying because the problems are so unique, and yet we seem to keep making some progress. Anyway, so we ended up with an interface. And we said, okay, so on one side, you're writing the scripts, trying to figure out what the scenario should be. Will they do justice to the disease, to the problem? Then you're also looking at, can you realistically deliver those experiences? But then there's also the product side of the thing. Like, what is the experience when you put on the headset? Like, what actually happens, It's not just the experience, you need to guide the user. And so this is some mock-ups of when you put on the headset, you basically have these modes where the user can either be shown the experiences, they can be trained on them, or they can be tested on them, right? And if you say show me, then you get into show me different types of dementia, show me stages in progression, or a day in the life. So let's say in this case we're picking stages in progression, early stage, and we're trying to say try scenario 1. Great. And this is just like really, really basic mock-ups of how we think through these things, but really the setting is a living room, and this is a scenario. When the instructions on the screen or audio say that you are in your living room, pick up your keys from the table and go hang them next to the front door. All right? So you do that, you're in VR, pick up the keys, you drop it next to the keychain, next to the door, and then the instructions say, oh, very good, now it's time to enjoy a little sun in the balcony, go for it, right? So you head to the balcony, and you take in the view. Typically, it's supposed to be an elder care home, something where the elderly person lives. And then you say, okay, perfect, day for a stroll, let's go for a walk. But we'll need to lock up first, so let's get those keys. And then, ta-da, when you go there, it's like, oh, where are those keys now? We've, of course, secretly hidden the keys away while you were in the balcony, because it's VR and you can do these kinds of things. And then this guy's like a bit frustrated. Oh, where are the keys? So you say, oh, where are those keys? So you see how hard it is to simulate memory loss in someone who doesn't have memory loss. And the user is thinking, what? I just put the keys there. Obviously you hid it. So how do you get away with a trick like this? And how do you get away with simulating something like memory loss in a short scenario? Super fun. So yeah, so then you create this disorientation, and then you say, why is this happening? Well, early stage dementia is characterized by lapses in memory, which seem to be unimportant, but then, this stuff could kind of escalate over time. And if you notice this in your elder, what you should do. Because usually the way people deal with it is they kind of slam the elder, the carer might yell at the elder and say, what the hell? You lost your keys again, you stupid old person, and always here to make my life miserable or whatever. Especially, I think family members are nice, but especially if the elders are in some care home or something, they might not get the best treatment at all. So, how do you deal with this? So that's kind of like the format behind the whole product. So we said, well, we have a whole bunch of like these scenarios and different levels, and we kind of productized it to a bit. Yep, hope that makes sense. This was the product dimension of the whole thing. So the goal is really to have this sort of interface where the user can choose to go through these different scenarios, and as they do, they get to learn the different stages, they get to try different things to different ways to deal with those stages, and so on. Maybe there's some points, or maybe there's a guided, like a nurse-like person telling them something, etc. Great. So, I think the big takeaway from the past two scenarios that I showed you was that trying to simulate something in the larger external world, such as a street, or a supermarket or a neighborhood, is exceedingly complex because the number of variables in there are just so many. But if you try to simulate something in a home, then you have much more control. And actually, people with advanced dementia, they usually tend to be not very, they're not very traveling a lot, or they're not out there. They're mostly kind of in their homes or around their homes. And so the big shift for us was to say, hey, let's not try to go after the whole world and show what these breakdown situations could be like in the world. Let's try to do it in the home itself. For example, this is a photograph of someone who has dementia, who's getting more and more demented. Is someone who sees the shadow of a common clothes rack or a coat hanger, and they mistake it to be a person, or they mistake it to be something something threatening. So these sorts of things can happen in the home. And we started to say, why don't we minimize the number of stimulus or the number of like elements at play in a particular scenario, and why don't we just control what's happening and make it very minimal? And so our more recent scenarios have started to be more in the domain of the home, very simple things, very simple behaviors and their consequences. And this is just I just have some final slides on some of the recent art we've done. Luckily, we picked up some collaborators along the way, and this is work by our 3D artist Severi, who's been working quite hard in his free time, entirely out of passion, to kind of come up with the kinds of homes or environments where our scenarios will be located. And this is kind of a typical home of an elder. And I just wanted to show you these pieces because of the detail that has gone into the art already. That's done on a computer. That's pretty cool, I think. And so our first scenario that we're developing is going to be basically in a toilet and in a living room. So in the home of an elder. We have a pretty exciting scenario coming up, and this is some of the early art from the scenario. I have no idea how he got that effect on the wallpaper there, but that's really cool. Oh yeah, I want to look at it myself. Yeah, well, you run into these kinds of weird issues where cultural, what do bathrooms in India and bathrooms in Finland have in common? Because we obviously want to build something that's scalable, that can be applicable to all kinds of markets and all kinds of elder populations. So it is pretty tricky to think of things that are just culturally neutral and geographically neutral. Think of home environments, for example. But I think we're getting there. We have some reason to believe that we could develop something that's not too specific to a particular region. And I'll just close with a couple of slides on the team, really. I'm Ashwin. That's my sister Amulya, and we founded the project together, and we've been accelerating it from the very beginning. Amulya is a dementia expert, and she works at an elder care home in my hometown, and my background is in design and psychology, and I work mainly in product design. So that's us, and we've been getting great help. Our core team has been changing. That's another thing about projects like this, is that essentially it's just a labor of love, and until you get serious funding and until you find a sort of you solve the chicken and egg problem of having funding and doing the work, which then creates more funding, you just have to rely on picking up people. So I guess one of the big reasons for me to be here is also just to spread the word and pick up more potential collaborators for this project. Because although the going is slow, we're pretty psyched about the progress we've made, coming from nothing. So Kalle, for example, Severi and Markos are all in our core team right now. Severi's been helping with the art right from the beginning. Kalle is more and more hands-on with the UX and the product itself, and Markos has a ton of interesting stuff he's done in science that we think he could help us with, things like simulation sciences, dementia, neuroscience studies, and so on. But then the list is long. Actually, we've been really lucky to get all sorts of help in the psychology, neuroscience space, the simulation space, the game space, and now also in the business and marketing. And also there down there is like Pixelache together with Helsinki XR Center in Arabia. And I think I really like kudos to both these organizations as well for supporting us and joining us in this very early stage of our journey. Yeah, really that was the project. And I guess our main goal now is, like I said, to simulate that first and the only scenario that we're aiming for, which would be a proof of concept. We have a very clear idea about what that concept is going to be. We know what those 2 or 3 minutes are going to, what it's going to look like. So we're just in the process of getting the team together to build out that piece. And yeah, you can find my contacts on the festival page, and if you want to reach out to me, collaborate, or just chat about anything, I'm always available. Thank you very much. Cool.
So what is the main platform that you use as like an interface for this? Like, is it like, because AR can happen with mobile devices?
Yeah.
This is maybe designed for AR goggles, like VR goggles, or?
This would be, the first target device would be the low-end, cheaper VR goggles, yeah. Like the Facebook products.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So essentially, if they are cordless, if they're standalone, and just like, easy to wear, light, that's the range of goggles, that's the range of headsets we're going for. Mm-hmm. And it is VR, this is not AR. We would need to have an entirely simulated room, because all of that art that I showed you is really, you're going to be standing in that room and doing stuff which then help you see what breakdown or cognitive decline feels like.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and clearly the price point of the headset is a big deal, because and that's where the whole being too early in an emerging kind of space is one of those problems where you just have to wait for the market to catch up.
Yeah.
The large headsets are still not very widespread, but the smaller headsets, the cheaper headsets, are becoming more common, and gaming will be the first application, the reason why people will get them in their homes. So we're thinking we can ride that wave and put this out as an app on VR app stores.
Yeah.
But also we're looking for delivery partners. For example, it could be available in a clinic, it could be available in a hospital, it could be available in a city organization. Because unlike a game, this is not something you need to watch every week or play all the time. It is a learning experience.
Yeah.
So that remains to be seen, the specifics of that.
You were talking about the games and the high-end kind of the experience. There's also one like kind of when you get to this high-end, there comes this uncanny valley. The high-end games, they don't look real; they look like games. And the more realistic it gets, the more it annoys you.
Exactly.
The almost real.
Yes.
So that's all.
Yeah.
So a question when you want to dangle things like dementia, do you try to get the real like?
Yeah. How realistic do we go?
Experience, or do you want to make kind of even comically simplified things?
Yeah, to be honest, the answer is we don't know it until we see it.
Yeah.
To be honest, that's the truth. But this is something that showed up on our radar. A lot of the smartest people we spoke to brought up the same issue immediately. One of the key things I think is to just reduce human or human-like presence in the experiences themselves. So we're thinking of things like just using voice, for example. One of the things that you have to remember is that this is not a free-to-play kind of a scenario. You just can't go anywhere and do whatever. you are guided very strongly on a certain interaction path. You start in a certain place and something has to happen to you in order for us to show you a hallucination. It's not yet so elaborate as a game where you can just go do whatever you like and then we can show you what we want to show you. It's not that well funded, it's not that big. So we're gonna have to use tricks like using the voice of someone who is in the home but not show that person. And if we do show them very minimally and stuff like that. So it does come down to architecting the scenario itself. And also that ability to deliver that person, the realism, becomes better with money. So in the beginning we might have to fake it and not really include people at all, or include people very minimally, but if we raise some money then we can say, okay, we can start building out some characters. But honestly, in my head, I don't know what the final person in there will look like and what they will appear. But that's a real concern, for sure. Andrew was next.
I have two different questions.
Sure.
And thanks for the talk. And I'm not familiar enough about the aspects of dementia and how you can model that or give empathetic understanding of this. But as far as I understand, you're making this as a tool for caregivers to help them understand, right? But I also get this feeling, I don't know if it's correct, that the familiarity is a very important aspect of things, and the breakdown of familiarity is what causes confusion and the distress, right?
Yes.
On both sides.
Yes.
Right? And here you have a scenario-based tool which you drop people in. They don't necessarily have familiarity with it. So how do you build up the familiarity with the environment that you're modeling and the everyday life situations, which then start to break down?
Yeah, that's a
So
really...
how do you do that? And then you can maybe answer that first, and I have another question for you. So.
Sure. Well, we need to get very specific because, for example, if we wanted to confuse you as a wearer, as a player, or as the experiencer of the scenario, if we wanted to confuse you about how to wear a jacket, let's say, like put on a jacket, and when you're doing it, you don't find the zipper in the right place, or it doesn't, in a situation like that, you don't need to orient the player to familiarity. You don't need to educate them on something. You're just relying on knowledge they already have. So it really depends. Like what you're saying is theoretically right, but you just have to be tricky about it. Like in the example that I showed you, where making someone or letting the player know that this is their home street. You live here. That's really hard to do. That's like in-game familiarity or in-scenario familiarity. That comes from being in the scenario or being in the life situation many times. But there is a generic familiarity, things like combing your hair, putting on your shoes. These things so we're going to have to ride on memories, we're going to have to ride on familiarity of things you do in life already and break those down in the scenario so we don't have to do the work of the setup. So in the end, like I said, also answering Anti's questions, the architecting of the scenarios, the scripting of the scenarios, that's where the real key is, I think. That's the real work, and it's in the details. But a lot of the time we're going to have to work around these problems. There are no, templatized answers to these things. That's a real concern. Yeah.
Can I ask another question, or
Sure.
someone else want to?
Go for it.
Well, now it's a technological platform thing.
Yeah.
So why choose VR? I mean, if you want to work with people's familiarity, why aren't you using an AR headset scenario where you're using the environment that people are already in and familiar with and mess with that?
That's a viable option. We just went down this road basically, and it could be something to think about. to be very honest.
And then I could even be a bit more provocative. Why use any of these platforms? Why don't you just do presence-based manipulation of people's actual spaces?
True that, that's also possible. Yeah.
So that it becomes more theatrical and embedded in people's everyday life situations, but scripted.
Yeah.
So you take away familiar items from people's homes, or the makeover format, rather than this is of their everyday life, rather than try to replicate scenarios in some virtual space that they're not familiar with.
That's very interesting. I mean, the last one, see, AR, in some ways, if you think about it, if you think about scale, I mean, scale is always critical. When the reason technology exists is because it has scale. And I'm also doing an e-learning kind of a product, so I'm learning very rapidly that the reason learning has moved online so much, onto places even like YouTube, it's because of scale. A teacher can teach 20 people, he can teach 1,000 people in a class, but it's almost impossible to simultaneously teach millions of people effectively except through digital. And so your last two questions, super interesting. The interesting point is the in-home intervention, your last suggestion, your in-home intervention and the AR are actually on two ends of the spectrum when it comes to scale. VR is somewhere in the middle. VR is fairly scalable, but you have the device adoption problem, you have the cost of production problem. But AR is doable and scalable. I mean, I would look into that a lot and think about it quite a lot. It's like we went down this VR route, but then that's a great point. But then if we did the in-home thing, the intervention would be terribly hard to scale. So not only would you kind of have to have all kinds of consent issues about being in someone's home and stuff like that. It's not something they grab and put on their face and experience. They have to let you into their lives, and you have to have buy-in for this and so on. So I just think in terms of delivery and in terms of scale, the last one, even though it's a really cool one, I would do probably some mock-ups. I would probably try to use that as a research opportunity, an exploration opportunity. I think in terms of scale it would be a problem, but we could learn from that.
But the scale issue is solved by having models, right?
Sorry?
The scale issue is solved by having models which are context specific, because you cannot expect, as you mentioned before, with how things look in a virtual space, that they can be applicable to different places, different cultures, different people, except different socio-economical class. So,
Are you talking about a delivery model?
well,
Like you mean train a lot of people to go and do it?
yes,
or?
but also like how you make it specific or like person-centric, right? So you're not bringing with you a lot of assumptions about what people recognize and what is familiar and what's not familiar. So like, I mean, I really appreciate the ambition, and I'm trying to think how to develop ways of engaging with people's, like you have a set range of scenarios which indicate stages of dementia, and then you think in different places and different contexts, what might those examples be? And you try to find ways to deliver that as an example that's site-specific or culturally or socio-economically specific to them. And I mean, because you have already explored, I guess, the meta level from a psychological and therapeutic perspective, but trying to find the way that you can help illustrate it to people who are not familiar.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's a good suggestion. Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, if you stay really focused on the problem, then I think we get more you become more flexible in terms of how you can serve that problem. And ideally, we should have all of these. We should have an AR app that can work in the home and and stuff like that, one step at a time. Any more questions? Vishnu had a question.
Can you say something about the challenges you've had in finding support for the project then? Where do you think people have doubts?
That's a great question. interestingly, I don't know if it's the Helsinki ecosystem or the startup ecosystem, but typically startup ecosystems right now anywhere are very supportive of this stuff. Accelerators, incubators, basically anyone who doesn't have to invest money into it is supportive of it, and it's kind of quite reasonable that it's that way, because as soon as you start talking finances, you need to have a clear roadmap. You need to know what the solution is, what problem is it solving, and the cost implications, the financial implications of all that. So I've luckily, probably because we've been taking on a very serious problem that anyone can relate to, and because we've been in a really good ecosystem, the Helsinki XR Center was like, yep, you can, here's a key, come tomorrow, you have equipment, you have a table, go for it. I think teammates, potential collaborators, organizations, we got a lot of support. But the moment we needed to raise money, people wanted to look at something more concrete. They wanted to see an example of it. Just kind of plans and mock-ups and sort of, how would you say, intent to build, even if our credentials were pretty strong as a team, were not enough. And I think it kind of goes to why, it kind of like explains why developers and people who actually code anything, technology, whether it's apps or VR, high-end, low-end, whatever, they're the ones who actually get funding, is because they can actually build. And we've not had a core developer in our team, a VR developer, who was able to do this on their own time. And I think it's just expected in the world today that you do a little bit of that building groundwork yourself. You build something, you're able to show it. And for better or worse, I mean, we've just not had either the person, or we've not had the ability to actually build anything, but we're getting there. Yeah. And Steve's given me the signal that time's up. So thanks for a great chat, guys, and thanks for being here. I enjoyed this very much. Thanks, Pixelache.